We have Phillip Hollobone from Conservatives, Jamie Wildman from the Green Party, Chris Nelson from the Liberal Democrats, and Jim Hakewill as an independent. So, in order, Clare, if you want to take 2 minutes, please, to give your opening spiel, please. Thank you.
It will probably be slightly less than 2 minutes. I'll stand up just so those at the back can see me, but I won't stand up for every question because my legs have had enough exercise so far this week. Welcome, my name is Clare Pavitt. I am your Labour Party candidate for the upcoming general election. This is my first ever parliamentary hustings, or my first hustings, and it's fitting, and I'm delighted to be having it here in Desborough. When I was first selected back in April, Desborough was the first place I came to visit to get to meet people in community groups. I would just like to say thank you to Kevin for organising this. And I think if there's one thing all 5 of us are going to be united on tonight, it's our appreciation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I think politics at the moment in Britain is really fractious. And I think we have a huge issue with trust and sincerity. So tonight, I am not going to quote you from the Labour Party manifesto, although I may refer to it if your question says so. I will answer you from a more personal place, and I will be completely honest with you. If I don't have the answer to your question, I will be honest and tell you that I don't know, but I will get the answer for you and come back to you on it. So I'm really looking forward to the challenges you're going to present me with, because I'm sure there are going to be some challenging questions out there that I'm going to have to think hard about. And I hope it's a really enjoyable evening. Mr. Hollobone.
Well, thank you very much, Clare. Let's all give Clare a round of applause. Ladies and gents, thank you very much for giving up your evening to attend, and thank you, Kevin, for being such a wonderful organiser. My name is Phillip Hollobone. I've had the privilege to be Desborough's MP since 2005, and I've always seen my job as being the voice of local people as best I can in Westminster, not Westminster's voice in Kettering. And locally, Desborough voted to leave the European Union. In the borough of Kettering, 61% of people on a 76% turnout voted for Brexit. And we must deliver that. We must get that done. That's what Desborough voted for. It's what I voted and campaigned for. And we've got to get it done. And that's why this election is being held, because there have been too many MPs in Parliament blocking Brexit happening. And once we've done Brexit, we can then move on to the priorities that are important to all of us. The NHS, police, schools, and the environment. On the NHS, I've successfully led a campaign to secure £46 million of new funding to develop an urgent care hub at Kettering General Hospital. I'm fully behind plans for 20,000 more police, with up to 300 more officers in Northamptonshire. I fully support the Conservative plan for £14 billion of new investment in our schools, upgrading the funding to £5,000 per pupil for secondary school pupils and £4,000 per pupil for primary school pupils. And locally, Lowton School and Montsai will be amongst those who benefit the most. And then, of course, we need to put the environment first. The very first political party I joined was the Green Party. It was then called the Ecology Party. So I've always regarded the environment as important. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Over to Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Hollobone. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Jamie Wildman. I'm standing for the Green Party. I'm a full-time PhD student in environmental science at the University of Northampton, studying the reintroduction of an extinct species of butterfly called the checkered skipper to Rockingham Forest here in Northants. So that's my day job. I want to tell you a little bit more about myself here because, again, echoing Clare's sentiments, I think it'd be nice if you got to know me tonight rather than just my policies, because you can find those in the Green Party manifesto. So, outside of my studies, I can be regularly cited in the gallery at Kettering Borough Council meetings as a representative, and Jim knows as well, of the Green Party and Kettering Eco Group, which is a local environmental body that's determined to see the council act upon the climate emergency declaration it made back in July Back in Kettering, I litter pick with Keep Kettering Tidy, volunteer on Wildlife Trust work parties to restore the habitat of Wicksteed Park Nature Reserve. I'm a member of Kettering Action Team, which is a proactive group working to enrich our community by organising and assisting with local projects. I volunteer at the Safe Until Daylight Homeless Shelter and run with the Kettering Town Harriers Athletics Club as well. I hold 2 degrees in English, so outside of my ecology research, I do occasionally like to delve into a good book and do a bit of writing as well. I stood for the Green Party in Daventry in the 2017 general election, and I can tell you categorically what the Green Party stand for here, so that there are there's no mystery around what I'm standing up to represent. So, as a Green, we want urgent action to combat climate change and a second referendum to give us the option of staying in the European Union, because what was on the table, what was offered to us in 2016 is not what's on the table now. And I said those things in that order for a very specific reason, because to us this is primarily a climate election, not a Brexit election. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Chris Nelson. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for this constituency. It's actually my 4th time standing as a parliament candidate, so I think the first time was against Phillip in 2010. I hope you're a little bit better than I did last time. But I was born and brought up in Kettering. I grew up on the Eyes Lodge. I spent a lot of time in Burton, Latham as a child, and I gained my schooling in Henry Gotch. And this constituency, while I don't live here anymore, it is the place that I view as home, and I'm very proud to be standing to represent it. Now, as a teacher, I am privileged to get to spend time working with young people to mould them into the citizens of the future, and I see through that how important it is to get that right. How the work that we do helps them to become better citizens. And so I am deeply passionate about improving educational outcomes. I think it's really important that we return school funding back to the levels that they were in 2015. I think schools around here have faced very unnecessary funding shortages. I'm very committed on that. I'm also someone who, as you can tell, is openly disabled. I have a stammer, as you can hear. I'm also openly bisexual. So I am, as you would expect, deeply committed to the rights of every individual to be who they wish and to be protected from discrimination and injustice. I'm also standing in this election because I'm a passionate European, passionate pro-European, and I look forward to explaining to you later as to why the Liberal Democrats are so committed to give you the choice to vote for a party that will stop Brexit if you wish.
I'd reiterate the same point to Kevin, to thank him for putting all 5 of us up here in front of an audience of about 90 people, which is great. I'm Jim Hakewill. A lot of you know me. I was born and brought up in Braybrook, 4th generation to live in this area. Very much had an enjoyable career on the Borough Council. I've been leader of the council and mayor, and I sit here underneath this chandelier, and Chris Mould is at the back. This was the first place that a mayor making for the Borough of Kettering was ever held outside the borough itself, the town of Kettering. So very much interested in green issues, a farmer's son, so I understand, thank you, understand those particular green issues, and I'm proud to say that I've worked with both other parties, certainly with the Liberal Democrats and with the Green Party and with Labour, to get the climate emergency put forward. So my particular manifesto is almost not one. My manifesto is to say that if you elect me, I'm the only candidate sat here where you will elect exactly what you get, Jim Hakewill. No pacts, no whip, no desire to have to follow any other party line. Things like the health service, very much in support of that, supporting very much in terms of policing, schooling, all the austerity things that have really crippled life for everyone, whilst some other issue, which I won't mention, has diverted the attention of everyone from the things that really matter locally. So, very much local born and bred, thoroughly enjoying getting wet, getting dry, getting wet, getting dry, going out and talking to people, which is what the canvassing is about. I like volunteering. I drive the Rushton Community Minibus. I started Street Watch in Broughton, and I also started the Speed Watch in Broughton. So, from that point of view, I present myself as a genuine local person, not parachuted in, looking after your interests first, politics if it comes along second. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all of our candidates for introducing themselves. So as we're officially now going to kick off, the first question is going to be asked by some of the students from Monarchy Academy who've taken up the front row here. So I'll give them the microphone and Clare will start the answering. Okay.
That's mildly terrifying.
Okay, so, excuse me. I was wondering what your opinions are on the monarchy and the status of the monarchy and the functions of the monarchy and how that should work going forward.
What a fantastic question. Out of all the questions I thought I might got, that was not in there. So I have an absolute fascination with the monarchy. I have an absolute love for the history of the monarchy. And I think there is a real place for the monarchy in this country. Whether our monarchy is working as it should do, I'm not sure. Do we need to look at it? I don't know. I think in all reality, what worried me recently was with the proroguing of Parliament, and it highlighted, I think, for a lot of people, and this might be unpopular to say in the room, but it concerned me greatly. I think it highlighted for a lot of people the how weak the role of the monarchy is in our parliamentary system, and should it be stronger? Should there be, does that need to be reviewed? So in general, yes, I'm like, absolute, love history, love the British monarchy history in particular. Do we need to review the status of the monarchy? Maybe it needs looking at.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm fully supportive of the monarchy. I mean, firstly, if we didn't have the monarchy, we'd have to have something else. And that something else probably would mean a president, and then we'd have presidential elections every 4 years, and we'd be more like America. And the problem about America is that they're permanently in some kind of presidential election phase, and I don't think people here would like that. The second thing is that the monarchy, the members of the monarchy, do a fantastic amount of good work. It is a form of public service, especially supporting charities and encouraging people across all walks of life. I mean, from memory, I think the Queen visited Kettering when Phil Sawford was the MP. Recently, Princess Anne has visited Equata, which is a horse-based charity in Grafton Underwood. And Prince Charles came a few months ago to visit a bespoke shoe manufacturer called Gaziano and Girling in Hallwood Road in Kettering. A lot of these visits you don't actually hear very much about, but they mean an awful lot to the institutions and organisations who they do visit. With regards to some of the behaviour of individual members of the royal family, I'm sure all of us would have concerns about that, but the Queen herself is an exemplar of how a monarch should behave.
First of all, great question. That is one heck of a way to kick off the night. That's nothing that I prepared for whatsoever, so it's great because it gives us the opportunity to speak off the cuff, which is fantastic. It's nice to have the chance to do that. The big issue is obviously with the proroguing of Parliament. That is obviously the ramifications of that, looking at the functionality of the monarchy from a political perspective, in a lot of ways, my instinctual response to that was basically to say that they're effectively redundant from a political perspective, because the Queen was just following normal protocol, really. When Boris Johnson came up with this proposed proroguing in Parliament, she couldn't turn around and say, no, that's not going to happen, I'm not going to allow you to do that. But she should, for the monarchy to function correctly in the modern society, with a modern parliamentary system, she should have had the flexibility to turn around and say no. Because it was very evident that the motivations that the Conservative government put forth for proroguing Parliament were completely unsatisfactory. You know, there was a lot of misrepresentation there about the actual process, the meaning behind why Parliament was being prorogued. It was obviously to delay any judgment, any decision, any disagreement around Brexit itself. So I definitely think the functionality of the monarchy in playing a role in our parliamentary system in modern politics does need looking at, because it's evident that the Queen's her hands seem to be tied, and her input, it seems, very, very limited.
As the other candidates have said, thank you for a fascinating question. This is exactly why we have Hustings like this, to discuss issues we wouldn't necessarily talk about elsewhere in the campaign, so thank you very much for bringing it. I think the fundamental point here is that we are a democratic country at heart. Whilst we value and we very much welcome the long tradition of having a monarchy, we also have the firm belief that it's for the people to ultimately decide what happens to the country. And I think the Queen recognises that, and I think that's why the British monarchy has survived for such a long time. Ultimately, I think it's important that we keep the Queen out of politics, and it's incumbent upon politicians to do that and to respect that role. I very much value that we are a representative democracy, that we're able to change our minds if we don't like a particular decision, which is why we're having this election, to have that choice. And I think that we need to ensure that the monarchy is kept out of such political questions in future. I think it's very damaging to it. I think whilst I value it, and I think that it should continue for as long as people want it to continue, I think there is at times a need for some frugality and a need for accountability. We've seen in the last few weeks, I think, examples of that with the Duke of York. I think it's absolutely right. The Duke of York should be helping the American police with their inquiries. I don't assume he's done anything wrong, but he may well have some information on that situation. And I trust and hope that the monarchy will ensure that this kind of situation doesn't happen again. Ultimately, I think it's something which is valuable to us, and we should keep it very firmly away from party politics and politicians.
Thank you, Chris. Fabulous question, absolutely. I remember I went to Monarchy and did some sort of a session on politics, and the question that one of the young people asked me was, what was the worst decision I'd ever made? And that question remains in my whole political career as a great question. So it is a good question and thrown us all. I love to be patriotic, absolutely, from that point of view. When I was mayor of the borough of Kettering, and as others will know, when you are the mayor of the borough, you are the Queen's representative if the Deputy Lord Lieutenant doesn't turn up. Sadly, no royal members turned up during my year, and the Lord Lieutenant was always ready if they had have done. So, very much in favour of the monarchy. One of my ancestors was thrown into the Tower of London in the 16th century for disagreeing with Charles I, but I can say that I don't hold a grudge against the monarchy for that one. In relation to behaviour, everyone should behave in the same way, and perhaps some part of the question was about what's been in the news in recent times. So I don't think the monarchy is in any way isolated from the rest of us in behaving and having the proper standards of behaviour. The other aspect of that is I love our historic heritage in terms of buildings and all the beautiful places that the monarchy keep. And whilst a lot of people would wish there not to be a sort of feudal system about that. There are many gorgeous places we have because they are owned in some sense by the monarchy and they are maintained in perpetuity for us. So very much in favour of the monarchy, but they have to behave the same way as the rest of us.
Okay, so we give a round of applause for the first question, I think. As all the candidates said, that's a great question from a young man at the front there from Monarchy Academy. Okay, so we've got a second question of the evening from Matthew Pelachuk.
Okay. Following a recent survey of 1,800 children across Northamptonshire, 37% highlighted the need to do more physical activity to improve mental well-being. With physical education being squeezed in school timetables and only 1 in 5 young people doing 60 active minutes a day, can you tell me what funding is currently available to schools and the wider community to tackle this? And if elected, what will you do to further tackle the decline in young people's well-being by using sport, play and physical education as a system and provide opportunities for all young people to do an hour a day sport and physical activity?
Okay, so Jim Hakewill, if you can answer that one.
Answer to the first question is no. I don't know how much is available for funding for physical activity. I think that one of the aspects from some years ago was where competition was taken out of sport in schools, and I think that was to some degree detrimental. I also believe that teachers who have gone through their training should be left to work out the curriculum without it always being top down. In other words, being told what should be in the curriculum almost every minute of every day. Certainly at the Borough Council level, we had a walking and cycling motion at a recent council meeting, and I was very, very supportive of that, and upset by the fact that the Borough Council had a cycling policy from 2005, which had not yet, in fact, been enacted in any sensible way. So my view on that is, as someone whose BMR is above what the norm should be, but I'm working on that during the election, that sport should be there, it should be available, and it should be properly funded within the education system. So my overall answer is, yes, I would be in favour of more funding for those sports, finding the right places. For example, the Aztecs in Rothwell want new grounds. We've got hundreds of acres of land around. We should be making those grounds available. The other aspect that we've supported was the Kettering Cycling Club, which meets in Rothwell, and making sure that they've got facilities as well. So totally on board, should have more exercise, should be properly funded.
Thank you for an excellent, difficult question. I must confess on the specific topic of what funding is available for specifically to increase sport. I also cannot tell you exactly what funds are available, but I very much agree with the thrust of your question. We do need to get kids in particularly doing more sport and physical exercise, and I think implicit in your question, I think, is a recognition that the time for sport in the school curriculum has been severely restricted in recent years, and that does have a knock-on impact for mental health. And as a teacher, I see, particularly with the end of unitised exams, I see how stressed students are, and I agree it should be tackled. What can we do about it? Well, the Lib Dems in general are looking to invest £50 billion over the next Parliament in school funding. That's mainly to be raised from the increased tax revenue we think we will get from the boost remaining in the European Union. But I also think beyond schools, I think local government funding has faced has faced a big squeeze. Not helped by our Conservative County Council essentially going bankrupt, which is causing all the local government reorganisation we're having. We need to make sure that councils have the funds that they need to be able to provide more than just the core services and be able to look into the kind of sports provision that Jim rightly talked about. I also think in terms of the curriculum, which is what I alluded to earlier, I think one thing that might help, I don't know, is if we take curriculum out of the hands of politicians and put it in a team of educational experts who can look at these issues in the round, and rather than these things being a political football. And if that was the case, hopefully the argument that you put across, I would imagine that would be quite a strong argument, and hopefully that will be taken into account.
Unlike Jim, you can probably tell I do a bit of running. Sorry. Yeah. Specifically on the topic of funding for sports, I don't have a figure for you on that. I can say that the Greens are going to invest £4 billion per year extra in schools to fill quite a substantial funding gap. And I think the Greens want to put forward a half-day equivalent of sports-related activities per week into the curriculum as kind of a mandatory thing. Speaking more locally, we need massive investment in sports facilities, community sports facilities, and for those that are already extant in schools, to ensure that they're readily available for people to access them, to have some sort of motivation and some freedom and some availability to get involved in sports outside of schools, to engage young people in healthy, beneficial lifestyles, really, that will be conducive to a healthy mental and physical well-being. I don't really have a lot more to say on the subject, to be honest, other than that I massively support, obviously, because I'm a very sporty person. I do a lot of outdoor activities, so sports are very essential to my well-being, because I appreciate the benefit that they provide both physically and mentally. So yes, all in favour of introducing access to sports and pushing forward physical activity in curriculum. Thank you.
I may be wrong, Matthew, but there was a little bell ringing in my head when you asked the question. I think you're a PE teacher at Montside. Yeah, that's fantastic, and we're lucky to have you. I don't know the specific answer to your question. I apologise. All the best schools find time in the school timetable for physical activity. I know my two children always seem to be doing something to do with sports in schools, either during the day or afterwards. And our local community, both here in Desborough and in Kettering and Rothwell and elsewhere, we're blessed with all sorts of clubs and societies involved in physical activity. Off the top of my head, I can think of local boxing club, local trampolining club, there's rugby club, football, squash, all sorts of activities available locally, often run by volunteers, frequently funded now by the big lottery, which can provide valuable funding for local groups. So I agree with you that it's an important issue. The funding is available both directly from the government and through the lottery funding and other sources.
Thank you. Like my fellow candidates, I can't tell you off the top of my head how much funding is there specifically for sports. Just there is a huge amount of funding to go back into schools to obviously cover the cuts that we've experienced. I think this is a really interesting topic because, yes, we've definitely seen a squeeze on a lot of subjects in our schools, and some things that aren't academic-led are being forced down and cut out. So we definitely need to get that back in there, and we need to make sports a key part of the curriculum. I used to be a civilian instructor in the air cadets, and believe it or not, I didn't actually do the sports myself, I just encouraged young people to do lots of sports. And what I found with young people, and I myself was not a sporty child, I hated PE at school, I did everything I could to get out of it because it wasn't my strength. So what I would like to see is, a bit like Chris said, is taking the curriculum out of the hands of the politicians and put it back into the hands of education. And in primary school in particular, I would really like to see sports and physical activity built into a creative curriculum. So whilst young people are learning maths, they're also actually physically active whilst doing it, or while they're learning English or so. I don't know, you look bemused. Are you aware of the creative curriculum? Yes. The gentleman back there. So it's basically where you take a topic and you build a maths or English or history subject around it, so you build in learning of each of those. So we're incorporating physical activity back into mainstream education. I think another big issue as well is getting children up and moving and active. And I know particularly here in Desborough, you know, we had the issue with getting the play parks in place, so children have actually got somewhere to play and be physical. So I'm being waved now, so I will finish, but thank you.
Okay, so another round of applause on that question, please. We'll move on to the third one. And we have Ricky Todd with the third question this evening.
I've got an update to the question, something that happened recently. Sorry, not used to using a microphone. My voice doesn't normally need it. When a young man has been arrested, sentenced for carrying drugs, Class A drugs, and gets 5 years for it, it's a very strange thing when he turns to his mum and dad and says, it's a relief. It's a relief. I'm away from it. He's away from the threats, the violence, the threats about his family, and it's a time for him to relax for the first time in years. County lines is an issue that I think we all know about. If we don't, it's quite briefly this. It's where the vulnerable young people in our communities are being used and abused by the drug barons and their acolytes. The reason it's happened is because there's been a gap in contact between the young and society. We used to have those contacts. We had the police that could support them. We had the local police who had the time and could spend time with the kids. But the police aren't alone. They are, at that time, they weren't alone. They had outreach organisations which used to help the kids, keep an eye on the kids, and could feed information through about problems. Of course, that was all taken away with police cuts, and also the cuts to the outreach services. So two of the politicians sitting here just now asking for my votes tonight are two people that created the vacuum of communication between the young and the rest of society. And that vacuum has created the problem we have today. More police promised, well, we've heard the promises before, but even so, it's going to take 2 or 3 years to get those police on the streets because you've also closed all the training centres for the police. And we don't have the volunteers anymore that look after the youth. So what are we going to do now?
This is an incredibly important question because it is about the future of the next generation, aspirations, and really the future of our children and our communities. You're right, that vacuum is there. Funding has been taken away from youth services. There will take time, if these police officers are coming from the Conservative government, to get them on the streets. What is a key issue here is the root cause of the problem. Why are these young people becoming disengaged, and you know, why are they getting into issues? And it's because the youth services just simply aren't there. Children are being excluded from school and being told, you know, not given that hope. So fully funding back into youth services, so we have organisations like Youth Works and people catching young people before they fall is absolutely essential if we move forward. One of my key pledges is to create positive futures, and that is about investing in our young people, and it's about saying to a young person from a very young age, you're amazing, you're fantastic, you're really good at that, let's build on that strength. That's not to take away that there is a gap in our police service, which also needs to be dealt with as well. With regards to county lines, yes, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem within this constituency. I think the last number I heard was there were 14 county lines within the constituency of Kettering. That is massive. That's 14 drug gangs preying on our vulnerable young people. And there are 25% of young people in Kettering living in poverty. That's a lot of vulnerable young people to be preying on. And that has to be stopped. And there has to be closer works between the police and the London Metropolitan in dealing with that.
Well, we've had some success locally with the breakup of one of the first county lines operations into Kettering from London, and the local police successfully arrested the individuals involved as well as those in London, and they've been convicted and they've been sentenced. Those sentenced weren't vulnerable young people in Kettering. These were drug dealers from London who were driving from London to Kettering to peddle drugs to our young people. And they've all been given exemplary sentences. And I raised this in Parliament, and I praised the local police for the work that they've done. It isn't just a question of more police. I'm sure all of us here would agree we need more police. One of the big issues is that when people are caught and they are convicted of crimes, all of them never serve their sentence in full. And I'm critical of both the Labour government and the Conservative government, who are still far too soft on when we catch these people and sentence them, they're not in prison serving their sentence in full. Because if they're in prison, they're not out there committing crimes. And if you go to Kettering Police Station, look up on the wall, there are 35 people there. These are the persistent and prolific offenders. These are the people who commit most of the crime in our borough. The police know who they are, they catch them, they're sentenced, and the police, our local police, wait for them to be released on whatever day it is because they know they're going to go back and commit more crime. If these people were inside for their sentence in full, we'd have less crime on the streets of Desborough and Kettering.
Right, so this is an issue that is really significant to me. I've got two senior members of my family in the Northamptonshire Constabulary, relatively senior positions, and I was fortunate enough at the start of July to spend 2 days on the front line with Northampton and Kettering officers, so far as I was wearing a blue stab vest and riding around in police cars to see what those guys were dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I did that precisely to get an insight of what sort of challenges police officers face in Northamptonshire on a daily basis, and they're incredibly significant. The issues with drugs is colossal, but you have to go back to the root cause of why that's happening. You know, we had, I think one of the chaps that we took into a holding cell the evening in Kettering, the second day, he mentioned there were 6 drug dealers on one street in central Kettering. One thing that kept recurring with them was how much they were lacking resources. They were lacking problems with manpower significantly. I'm not going to go into tons of stuff about numbers because we need thousands of police officers, of course we do, and I'm not going to make any promises on that front. But it's looking at the culture of exactly why things are happening. And lack of police officers is one, lack of technology is another significant issue. They've got great pieces of kit, but there's a level of incompatibility with some of the software that they're using, that those guys are spending so many hours doing admin stuff, trying to get the footage of their body-worn cameras onto PCs and taking out all this unnecessary garbage. There's so much time they could be spending on the streets, but again, it's a lack of resources because those guys should be out there doing stuff, but they're so thinly spread that they have to spend time doing that. So I'm in Kettering as part of the Kettering Action Team that I mentioned earlier. There's something being set up called the Kettering Town Youth Partnership. I think I'm right in saying that's what it's called. Yes, I'm getting a nod, which is good. So we're trying to do things to involve young people outside of school in activities to keep them away from these kind of less desirable avenues of life. So we're trying to build activities, build communities and groups that engage young people. And on the education side, curriculum is a massive issue. There's so much impetus on schools working on the curriculum, on testing, and a lot of people that don't fit that mould, they fall through the cracks. And there's a significant lack of resources there, that people haven't got the time, teachers haven't got the resources to spend time on these problem children, you might call them, that need care and need attention. And they find out that the curriculum, the academic system's not for them, and they go off and they feel insecure because there's a lack of police officers, there's a lack of police presence locally, and they need that reassurance, and they go and form gangs because it gives them that sense of commonality that they're looking for. It's a massive issue, and I completely agree that it needs combating.
Ricky, you said it was. You said something which struck me actually. The words of the child. It's a relief. I'm away from it. That rings sadly true. As a teacher, sadly I've come across students who are involved in these kind of situations. There's one in particular I can think of. About a month ago, we actually started a fight in my classroom. He actually started a fight, broke it up, finally managed to get him away, and he ran back in and started again. Now that sounds terrible. Sounds like someone's out of control. But when you sit down and you actually talk to him, and you actually work out what's going on, the boy's so scared. This boy's so frightened, on edge, day in, day out, because of his involvement in one of these gangs. It's absolutely despicable what they do to them. The idea that they can come in, they can tempt them in with new trainers or new phone or new iPad or give them cannabis or whatever it is that they're doing to tempt them in and then bring them into this gang world from which they cannot escape. It needs to be stopped, and it is absolutely awful, and you're absolutely right to bring it up. Of course, more police should be done. But you're never going to believe any politician who stands up here says we need more police. Of course we do. But it's a lot. But we need a little bit more than that. I think there's no easy solution. I'm pleased that the British Transport Police have been established as a central hub to try to track these things across the country. One of the things they've done is take advantage of different police forces over different county borders. I think that's partly why it's called county lines, I believe. And I think that might help. I think there needs to be a sustained investment in that. I think the youth service, as Claire said, is something that desperately does need to be reinstated. I think it's vital, as I said earlier, for the councils to get proper funding. This is one of the areas why. And I also think, it's maybe a little controversial, I think we need to look at drugs policy as a whole. One of the things they might do is use cannabis as a gateway, use it as an opportunity to get hold of young people, and I think there's a reasonable case. I mean, wait, stop. I'll just finish this point. I think there is a reasonable case for regulating of that and controlling the strength. So we take it out of the hands of the gangs, as Canada has successfully done, so that they can't use it as a gateway to some of these despicable drugs that they deal with.
Every child is special. Every young person has skills and talents which the education system and the brilliant teachers and people that we have within the education system can develop and to accentuate those talents. And very often it's perhaps that system and the direction from central government that leaves those who perhaps aren't simply academic, that want vocational careers, not to have that chance in the curriculum. It's a bit like Matthew's earlier question about sport. Every policeman I've come across locally in 34 years now of working in this borough is individually brilliant. They are fantastic. There are just not enough of them. And it's a massive indictment to be sitting here with the former MP saying, and Claire saying too, that we have 14 county lines coming in to this particular borough. Far more than Corby and only on a similar level to the much larger Northampton. That's an enormous indictment upon the austerity that has been forced upon the policing. The thing that really irritates me is that we've had 10 years of cuts to policing, and now we're being told that we'll get some of it back and we should be proud and grateful for that. Just taking an example, we had a cannabis factory in the middle of Kettering in the old cinema, which some people here may remember going to when it was a cinema. If there were enough police on the beat and enough police around, those sort of things would be found much more quickly than was the case there. The other point that I'll make is that you'll remember that awful situation of sheep being slaughtered in farmers' fields around. It was out towards the other side of the county. Massive uproar. The police resources were focused on that. They caught the people trailing off down the A14. What that said to me, if the resources were there, properly funded, then we would have a much greater chance of not just saying lock them up forever, but understanding why they get there, giving them the opportunities not to find themselves in that position.
Okay, thanks Jim, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, our next question this evening is from Teresa Bullock.
Salford is hiding me, so I'm going to stand up. Right, can you all see me? Right, I am actually a secondary school teacher by profession, and I'm one of the thousands who have left the profession. I spent 30 years and 2 terms shy of at a school in Kettering, which used to be known as Henry Gotch. In fact, Chris is an ex-pupil of mine, so he still looks the same. It must be the oil of Ole you've been using, Chris.
I wish.
But seriously though, school budgets have been cut, teacher recruitment is decreasing, graduates are quitting after 5 years, experienced teachers like me are leaving the profession, class sizes are increasing, parents are being asked to prop up a creaking system. If you are elected, what will you do to rectify the crisis in our schools?
Very simple answer to that one is to put the proper funding in to our schools. Reading some of the literature that came out from the teaching union and looking at the amount of money that has been taken out of education over the last number of years is quite horrendous. I also think that there should be much more control of how the schools work within the schools and by the teachers themselves. If you don't give young people the right start in life, and if you don't retain, if I may say, you may have been happy to retire, but if you don't retain people who have all of that knowledge, all of that skill, and all of those years of experience within an organisation like a school or within the hospitals or within the police, that you wear them out such that they leave and we lose all of that skill, I think there should be much greater emphasis on retention. One of the things as an independent candidate, and a lot of people on the doorstep say, well, what do you stand for? One of the things that if I'm elected to be the MP of this constituency, I'm not bound by any of the dogma of any of the political parties. So what I would pledge to do is to identify what opportunities there are in terms of improving school funding, and I would support that wholeheartedly. My wife, who's sitting there, was a school secretary and very much understand how the pressures on teachers over the last 20 or 30 years have increased. So basically, allow the professionals whose vocation it is to govern and run their schools, but give them enough money to do it.
Thank you for your question, Mrs. Bullock. I do remember you very, very well. Thank you very, very much. I've already spoken about the need to increase school funding tonight, so I won't repeat that point. I think what we need to do is to try to change the culture in schools as best we can. Teachers do the best that we can. And there's a few teachers in the room, and we often do so with a lot of classes to teach, a lot of students to teach, and often not as much time as we would like in the classroom enough time out of the classroom to prepare our lessons and to mark and to produce the outstanding lessons that we want to do. And the fundamental issue we need to solve, if we're to solve the recruitment and retention crisis, is to give teachers more time to teach rather than go through a treadmill. However, that's very difficult to actually put into practice. All parties are suggesting that they're going to invest in schools this time. We're suggesting 50 billion over the course of a year. Will that be enough to fix every problem? I suspect it won't. It's the truth. We always need more. We just need to do the best we can. So things we can try to do. One of the things Lib Dems want to do is to increase the starting salary of teachers to £30,000 a year, higher than we currently have it, with the intention, I believe, of trying to ensure that we retain teachers, because around about half teachers leave after the first 3-4 years. I can understand why, doing the job. It is whilst I absolutely love it, it is very stressful. It is very time consuming. And if that's going to make people feel more valued, that's a good thing. And we also need to try to increase more of them so that we can give teachers that time. and so we can give students the class sizes that they need in order to properly progress. The other thing, I think, it goes back to the curriculum. I think if we can take curriculum out of the hand of politicians, as I said earlier, if we try to increase the amount of vocational qualification available earlier to the right people and make it rigorous, I think we can make sure that students get the education they need for their futures and try to individualise it the best we can.
So I already mentioned the figure. I'm not going to repeat that. The Green's aim is to reduce class sizes to beneath 20 pupils per class. I know a friend of mine who was teaching, well, I think she still is now, I think she's vice principal at Monarchy, perhaps. She, a couple of years ago, I remember seeing her outside of school hours vigorously marking papers until I think it was about 9 or 10 o'clock at night whilst we were trying to do green stuff at the time. So the workload is astronomical, and as far as I can recall, she was doing that day in, day out on a weekly basis. So I can understand and sympathise that the pressures of that type of environment would just be too much to bear over a couple of years. When I graduated from my English degree, I originally thought about going into teaching, but it didn't look attractive because it looked devastatingly kind of just terrifying, really, the amount of work that you had to do for what was effectively a very little starting salary. So that's a big problem. I imagine logic would tell me that if we reduce class sizes and transform a curriculum away from kind of consistent standardised testing and create a more creative schedule, a more creative curriculum, the workload will be lessened on individual teachers because they haven't got quite so much to mark, they haven't got quite so much paperwork to go through, and perhaps giving them the flexibility to create schedules, create teaching regimes that aren't just so paperwork and so test obsessed, because that was one thing I absolutely hated. I'm not that long compared to some of the people here outside of school, so I remember quite clearly what it was like. Yeah, sorry about that, Claire, I didn't mean you. It wasn't aimed at you. You're the same age as me, don't worry. Yeah, so, and I can remember I hated like the amount of testing I got. So I'm a PhD student now in environmental science, and this is my third degree, and one of my English degrees is from UCL. And my first year of secondary school, in the first week, I was tested 3 times, and I flummoxed something because I got put into a special measures class because they thought I was dyslexic. And I absolutely am not. There's nothing wrong with dyslexia, but yeah, it just shows that testing regime. So I was thrown into the bottom group for absolutely everything, and spent the next 5 years of my secondary school life working my way back up again because I was tested so early on, and it was a terrifying environment to go into secondary school. So I feel like it's on both sides. The stresses are there for both teachers and pupils, and they need rectifying pretty rapidly.
Thank you, Teresa, for your service as a school teacher. We need more people like you, and we need to retain experienced teachers. We also need to attract new teachers. Teachers need a pay rise. The starting salary for teachers is going to be increased to 30,000, but there's been massive investment locally in our schools, and the Conservative pledge is for a £14 billion school investment programme over the next 3 years, bringing up per pupil funding to the figures I mentioned at the start of this debate. But the good news for Desborough, for the whole of the borough, is that educational attainment in our local schools has never been higher. Local school pupils now are performing better academically than they've ever done before, and we should all be extremely proud of that. All of us here, of course, as candidates, want to see more investment in education, and it's certainly one of the Conservatives' top priorities.
Thank you. So, how to deal with this crisis? It is good to hear that our school standards here in Desborough are higher. Thank you, Mr. Hollobone. I would probably throw the question back, how much have our exclusions increased by? Because one of the issues that faces our teachers is around managing children that aren't at the league tables. So as we move into the academy systems, the league tables will dictate, and a lot of our children are going through an exclusion programme when they really shouldn't be, We focus on academia rather than celebrating the child's strengths, which is what we should be doing. You know, not all children are academic. I certainly wasn't, but you know, I have key strengths in other areas, and if we focus on them from an early age, you know, our exclusions will go down, our teachers will be less stressed. I think, as there's no secret in the fact that the Labour Party want to move away from the academy structure system. I was a school governor for 10 years, or 12 years, the chair was 10 years, and watching the hard work that teachers go through in planning and marking and meeting all the structures of Ofsted or the league tables, you know, they certainly do not have 6 weeks off in the summer. They are working every single one of those days and every single one of those nights. So we do need a whole new look at the education system. We all know Labour will be going for a national education service. We need to move away from this league table structure where our children are being used as collateral, because our children are not collateral for school academies or private industries that are investing in schools. Our children are the future, they are the next generation, and they are the strength of where this country is going. So I would say, Teresa, in dealing with this crisis, our teachers have to absolutely be valued, the funding has to go in, but the way in which we look at those league tables and we do school admissions, and that has got to go back into public service, fully into public service, and our children should be celebrated for their individual strengths and not academia alone.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. The next question is now from Joe Watson, who I don't think wants a microphone.
So my question isn't about the great echelons, it's about locally. So what will you do for Desborough? As the second largest town in the borough of Kettering, and also the biggest cash cow, what are we going to see from our MP?
Okay, I will stand up again. What will I do for Desborough? I think one of the key things here in Desborough, as you say, the second largest town, is actually having a voice that's being heard. And I'm not entirely sure, from what I have seen so far, that the Desborough voice is always being heard across the borough. I think sometimes when we talk, we become, and this is no way offensive to anybody, you know, from Kettering in the room, but you know, the constituency becomes very Kettering-centric. Glad I didn't have that Scotch now. So for me, what I do for Desborough as an MP is about ensuring that I'm here on a regular basis and holding regular surgeries here. It's about working closely with your town council and understanding what the issues are, but not just supporting them on what they need to get through, on challenging them on the things that they're not doing. And likewise goes for the borough council, because the role of the MP is both to support your local council and to challenge it. If a housing development or new homes for starter homes for younger people or a play park is not being built, your MP should be challenging that. Is it because you don't have the funding? Is it because you don't have the legislation? Is it because you don't have the planning? What can I do to make that happen? So as your MP, what I will do for you is make sure your voice is heard.
The job of an MP is to be the voice of local people in Westminster, not Westminster's voice in the local area. Now, Desborough is a hugely important town within the borough of Kettering, as you rightly say, Joe, the second biggest town in the borough. The borough is made up of Kettering, Desborough, Burton Latimer, Rothwell, Barton Seagrave, and 22 villages. So it's a very diverse local constituency. What the people of Desborough want from their MP, first and foremost, is to go to Parliament and get Brexit done, because that's what they voted for. They want investment in the National Health Service, and they will welcome the £46 million for the urgent care hub at Kettering General Hospital. They want more police on Desborough streets, which I would vote for as Desborough's MP, and they want more investment in Lowlands and Havelock and Montseye, which as your MP I would vote for. And I stand ready always to help local community groups, the town council, whatever they want their MP to help them with, I stand ready to serve in that regard. But the most important job of any MP is dealing with the hundreds, thousands of local inquiries that an MP gets every year, including from Desborough, and helping individual constituents tackle the difficulties that they come to their MP about.
Okay, so what we've done in Kettering over the past few months, I mentioned them at the start, was establish a Kettering eco group that we've got to look at like ecological issues, means of renewables and whatnot, but also something called the Kettering Action Team as well. So I'd be really interested. I mean, I'm concentrating on Kettering because that's where I live and that's where I have my friendship group and that's where I have a community around me where we work on these kind of projects. But it'd be really interesting to build these small little community groups out in places around Northamptonshire so that we can bring much more local issues, give them a forum, a means of communicating them to me, communicating them to other members of that immediate environment, that we can then bring into the council chamber, as I have done, as my colleagues have done over the past couple of months, and present them to a county council to discuss issues, to get them pushed through and get action on things like that. So I think that's really, really important to have some sort of local presence. So yeah, so whereas we have the Kettering Action Team, the Kettering Eco Group, it can be the Desborough Eco Group, it can be the Desborough Action Team, and then those people can feed back in. And so we need something equivalent to like a citizens' assembly, basically, where we have big forums like this, really, where people present their issues, and then we take them to the county council. And obviously, my job as an MP would be to be there to help the establishment of those groups and give those groups the means of communicating that message back to county councils, back to Westminster. Because as you rightly say, although we're standing in Westminster as MPs, it is community issues that we really know about. That we can't be all over the country at once. We can only really know about our constituency and target those problems. So I think that's probably a very good way of granularly building up from the ground up and bringing those issues more to the fore. In terms of other things that I bring to Desborough, again, concentrating most on Kettering, because again, that's where I live, but we're looking on a load of infrastructure stuff, like improving cycling networks and renewables and how vacant houses in Kettering Town Centre that's very dilapidated are converted to things like residential properties and giving small businesses the opportunity to have startups and things like that. So it's like centre regeneration is a big thing as well, making sure that these communities that are lost, that aren't thrown out of the way, that we do actually invest in them and revolutionise them a little bit to give some kind of a more progressive means of reinventing themselves for this new era. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think the first thing I would do as an MP for any part of the constituency, including Desborough, is to listen and be available. Shortly after I graduated from university, when I was a little bit younger, I was lucky enough to work in an office that was shared with Lynn Featherstone, who was a fantastically hard-working Lib Dem MP in London, and I saw firsthand with a team of very dedicated staff how much a good constituency MP and their office do to solve local problems, and there's no problem that's too small. So whether it was potholes in the street, whether it was an immigration problem that they were struggling to deal with through the Home Office, whether it was an issue where the council's not acting quickly enough. I saw that office do an excellent job in trying to tackle those problems, and I would want to do exactly the same. I would want open office. I'd want to employ staff specifically to solve those kind of problems, and I equally want to be available for surgeries and appointments whenever was so that people could bring any problems that they had to me and to others. I think specifically for Desborough, I'm not going to pretend to know it inside out. I mean, I've been here several times over the years, got a few friends over here, but I'm a Kettering lad originally. But I know that as towns are getting larger, as towns are growing, it is important that services and infrastructure follow the building houses. I know that hasn't always happened, and I think it's really important that we have access to good doctors, have access to good schools, that we have access to quality, cheap, affordable rail services at our local railway station that we don't currently have. And I think those kind of issues are important, and some of the ones I would want to be focusing on as MP.
What would I do for Desborough? I'd do what I've been doing for the last 30 months, which is trying to get Persimmon Homes in the Rothwell North development to build a strategic link road before the houses are built, particularly before Desborough South is built. It shocks me that as an MP, you can't get involved in a campaign like that. Simply, the Borough Council have allowed permission to be given, have ignored on Desborough South the highways request that the link road goes in first. So I would continue to do what I've been doing in the past with the Desborough Town Council colleagues to get that road in first. And if I was in government, I would want to change the laws that handed back powers on planning, not simply for developers and the Borough Council to tick box planning applications through, but to hand back control to local people in how housing comes. I'm not against housing, we need housing and we need affordable housing in that way. We are about 100 yards away from £1.5 million worth of Borough Council investment that has lain derelict for 15 years, called the Lawrence's site. When I was leader of the council, we were working on getting the covenant that the co-op put onto that site to stop any development taking place that was retail. What we want in Desborough is a choice of supermarket. What the Borough Council is doing, and I'd shame them on that, is talking about building 42 houses on that site. What we want to do is to talk to Aldi or Lidl or Tesco Jack, whatever particular store that happens to be. Because what happens in Desborough affects Rothwell and it affects the villages all the way around. So in my view, an MP should sign petitions on getting link roads first, should be campaigning, as you'll see from my literature, to make life better for local people. So what I would say to you, Joe, is I will continue working on that, and I know you and Phil and other colleagues on the Town Council have been working along that particular way as well. I would also try to see that the Hawthorne site, which is about to be sold, some of the revenue and capital from that gets invested back in Desborough and doesn't go off to Kettering. I'm sick of Rothwell, Desborough and the villages having it done to us rather than us asking for what we wish. I just don't.
Okay, thank you once again. And following on from that, we have a question from Marie Chapman.
I think we all recognise the need for housing in Kettering and the surrounding areas, but I'd like to ask what role you feel an MP can play in ensuring that there is as little negative impact as possible on existing residents before, during and after developments take place.
Thank you for the question, Marie. And I would also just simply make the point that you and others have worked tirelessly against the borough, against Persimmon, to try and get some of the things that you've just mentioned done. So I think the law needs changing. It is far too much in the favour of developers like Persimmon. I also think that when laws change, like environmental laws on air quality, for example, on Rothwell North, which has an impact on Desborough, when it came down to it, because Rothwell didn't want the traffic coming through, the developer has said, oh, we'll take it up the Rothwell-Desborough bypass and we'll come down past rigid containers through Desborough. You know, at the end of the day, I think an MP should be campaigning, and if there is a campaign like that, unlike my experience when we asked the MP to sign a petition to say we want to do that, my view would be, as an MP, you get behind those campaigns, you make life easier for people in that way. And you don't just roll over because a developer squeals and says, I don't have enough money to put that road in at the beginning. When you find the money in that way. The whole issue about new housing is we all agree with it, we all want the affordable housing as well, but there has to be a compromise that is mitigated, the impacts are mitigated on existing residents. And I suppose the last point is, no one with any sanity would put a strategic link road, which is intended to take traffic out of Desborough onto the A6 bypass, right the way through 700 houses, 200 one side, 300 the other side. So as your MP, I would be much more hands-on, much more interested in making sure that when development occurs, it does not damage existing residents and it makes future residents' lives easier.
Thank you very much for your question. It is obviously very important that when new developments are built of any kind, but particularly housing, because there's sheer size of them, that there has to be proper consideration of needs of existing residents. And at the basic point, that's responsibility of local councils, but it's also the job of the MP, I feel, to be keeping watch on those local councils and to be being a rather irritating fly in the ointment, should those issues be arising, and to try to fight for the local residents. Now, I'm not going to pretend to have anywhere near the amount of detail that Jim clearly has from all the years as being leader of the Borough Council, but I'll be looking to use experts like him and his expertise to try to understand these problems a little bit more and have discussions with people like yourself. And I think that's I think we need our MP to be willing to listen, to admit when they don't know everything, to seek advice, and then to push for the and to push the interest of residents. The number one job of an MP is to be an advocate for their community, and I think that's what I would try to do.
So my experience comes from the forthcoming East Kettering development that we're going to have on the east end of town. And that's a pretty massive development of several thousand houses, and I'm incredibly concerned about how that new build, that new complex is going to be integrated into the existing town. And there are a lot of issues that are, as yet, I have not been satisfied with, essentially. One of the issues is community integration. It's also to do with infrastructure, roadways, amenities. There are so many things, but take them one by one and break them down. It looks like in East Kettering in particular, I take that as kind of a case study, that there seems to be a significant lack of new provisions there, things like healthcare centres, shops, additional police resources to cover these new areas. So there's a lack of security that comes about. So it's like these new developments don't really give anything back to the communities that they're kind of like attached to. And principally, obviously, with a lot of new citizens comes a lot of new traffic, and the existing infrastructure, the road networks, don't have the capacity to support additional traffic as well. So this comes at great headaches to communities that suddenly are faced with gridlock, and with gridlock comes additional pollution as well. So we have an awful lot of ramifications that people struggle with. And pollution is a massive issue in Kettering right now because we've studied something, a recent air quality report that's come out has mentioned that one key junction in Kettering Town Centre exceeds the national guidelines for air pollution on 8 months out of 11 in the year. And this is before the East Kettering development comes upon it. And there's a significant lack of these air quality monitoring areas around the county, around the constituency. And that's something that really, really needs to be looked at before these big developments come in, because the consequences for them could be massive to people's health. So that's a significant issue. There's a lack of pedestrian access as well. We have a lack of cycleways, so a lot of these communities come in and people feel separated. They feel they have to drive everywhere because, as I say, there's a lack of amenities, there's a lack of resources, and people have to drive everywhere and use private transportation because they don't have the bus networks that have been integrated, they don't have enough bus services, they don't have enough cycle lanes, they don't have pedestrian access. So it just becomes these very insular communities that aren't attached and, as I say, aren't integrated into existing towns. Thank you.
One of the big challenges all of us face, whether it's Desborough or Rothwell or Kettering, is the number of new houses being built locally. And some while ago I was secretary of the STOP campaign, which was the campaign, cross-party campaign, to stop the overdevelopment of Northamptonshire. It was chaired by the former MP for Wellingborough, Sir Peter Fry. People of all parties were involved, and we got involved at a high level with a public inquiry, and we did manage to reduce the numbers which the then Labour government was going to impose on our local community. Now, the numbers are still high, but they're not as high as they were. And there are massive developments, not only for Rothwell North, but as Jamie says, for Kettering East. I mean, Kettering East is the equivalent of building a town the size of Desborough on the side of Kettering. So there are huge challenges for our local community. Again and again, the local planning authority, which is Kettering Borough Council, is constantly facing challenges for additional infrastructure. Of course, that's right. But it gets its advice on highways matters from the county council, which is the local highways authority. And if the county council says this road is fine, it meets the requirements, there's very little the local planning authority can do about that. Now, with regards to the Rothwell North development, the county council has said the road that's proposed meets its requirements. Kettering Borough Council didn't agree with that. They offered to try and get funding with the developer for a bigger road, but the developer did not want to go down that route. Now, it may be a change in the law could be brought about to force developers to take up local offers of funding. I agree that's something that could be looked at. But it's not that Kettering Borough Council wasn't interested. It was interested in finding a problem, but the developer didn't want to cooperate. With regards to Kettering East, one case there is that we do have infrastructure up front. We've got a primary school, Hayfield Cross Primary School, literally built in the middle of a field with no houses round it, because the school was being built well before the development, and that brings problems of its own. So I agree with the thrust of your question. We need to make sure that infrastructure is provided to accompany the new housing development so as to ease the pressure not only on new residents but on existing residents.
Thank you. This is clearly a local issue that's very, very important to you, so I'm not going to pretend to know the detail that Councillor Hakewill or Mr Hollobone have. I have to say, I actually agree with Chris on this. It's about working closely with the community and making sure that, coming back to my answer to a previous question, making sure your voice is heard. You know, Jim is right. The developers shouldn't be dictating, because a lot of the time when they dictate, it's because it's hitting their profit margin, and that needs to be stopped, because I don't want to make extra millions of pounds for Mr. Persimmons at the cost of your happiness and your quality of life. So I have to say, essentially, to answer your actual question is about how would you manage the impact on residents before, during and after the development. It's about that close working, and that close working with the Borough Council and the Town Council and with the local residents. But essentially, I pretty much agree with what these three guys are saying.
Okay, thank you once again to all of the panel. We've now got a question from Simon Stroud.
Evening. So, do you think, given the potential unitary changes, it was right that Desborough had to buy its library, or should it have taken a lease option? And if elected, what will you do to protect funding for services such as the libraries?
Thank you. Great question, Simon. Thank you very much for that. You know, the issue of Desborough Library is a really important one to this community. I think it's a really important one. When I lived in Rothwell, my daughter was very young, and the library was an absolute lifeline for me, because I didn't drive at the time. So I know how important these facilities are in the local communities. In short, I have to say, to be honest, Simon, we never should have got to this place. We just should not have got to this place. The funding should not have been cut for essential community services like libraries, and especially, you know, in a town where transport infrastructure, etc. And I speak from experience from having lived in Rothwell. Moving forward, because we are where we are, you know, moving forward, yes, absolutely. I think more funding definitely has to go back in to saving our libraries and to saving local community facilities, or expanding on local community facilities, because it's not just about young people having access to books or people having access to the internet. It's also a place where people go to meet. There will be times that that's the only place people can go to engage and work or talk or meet other people. It is a community hub where people get friendship and company and knowledge and learning and activities. So, you know, to answer your question, we never should have got here in the first place.
Well, I agree with what Claire has said about the importance of libraries, and I agree with what Claire says about we should never have got here in the first place. So all the Northamptonshire MPs made it crystal clear to the commissioners brought in to run the County Council and to the County Council leadership that proposed cuts to library services were simply unacceptable. And I'm glad that the County Council reversed its decision. Desborough Library is extremely important to Desborough. I realise that, and you realise that. And I was speaking to a local lady the other day who was a volunteer.
Hold on. Can we... hold on a minute.
The last 9 years, you voted 8 times to reduce central government funding for local government. So how on earth would you have been able to put funding into libraries when your main goal was to reduce that funding into local into our local government?
Okay, thank you for that. Can we have... when we get to the end...
We're here to challenge, politely, responsibly, our MP, and I think it's fair... Our previous MP, who is looking to be re-elected. I think it's only right and fair if we can simply make little points on blatant lies that they should be heard by the audience.
Okay, well, let the panel finish the question. Thank you very much, appreciate that. Let the panel finish all the questions that we've got, and at the end, as I say, if we get time, which kind of looks like we may have, then we'll go through that and you can go first, okay? Sorry, Philip, away you go. Thank you.
One of the things we've lost in this country is the ability to disagree agreeably. You may not like what I have to say, sir, but I hope at least you wouldn't accuse me of lying, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't lie, nor does anyone else at this top table. With regard to cuts to local government funding, yes, as the local MP, I voted for cuts to local government funding that affected councils across the country. Yes, that's correct. But every other council in the country managed its budget facing those pressures better than our county council here in Northamptonshire. And the local MPs made it crystal clear to the county council that cutting libraries was simply unacceptable. And the inspector, the independent inspector, who was sent in to look at the problem at the county council, concluded that the problem wasn't money, it was management. And if it was money, how come every other council in the country didn't manage its affairs as bad as county council?
Squeeze under a Tory council as well. So not every other council's managed it at all, because the Isle of Wight is a very poor place and you only moved to in April. So that again, it's not consistent. I'm not saying you're lying, but perhaps you don't actually see the big picture.
The big picture is that our county council is the only one that's gone bust. And it's gone bust because of huge mismanagement in the county council. That's the conclusion, not of me.
But that's under Tories. That is under Tories. So
That's the conclusion, not of me, but as the independent inspector sent in to look at the county council. With regard to Desborough's library and the specific question about whether Desborough needs to buy its library, now that's a decision for Desborough Town Council. Whatever it decides to do, I would totally respect. But my understanding is that all the local libraries will transfer to the new unitaries. There will be a straight transfer across. So it may be that Desborough Town Council wants to think, do we need to spend £300,000 on buying the library, or do we want to spend £300,000 on something else. That's a decision, though,
Okay, right.
for local people, not for the MP.
Okay. Hold on, John. Sorry. We'll come back to it at the end. Okay. If we move on to Jamie. Okay. Thank you.
So, Northamptonshire County Council, Tory-led mismanagement. That's essentially what it is. Simply clarified that in a way, in far less words that I probably would have been able to under my own power. I mean, it's austerity, austerity, austerity has devastated communities and essentially resulted in a loss of resources and public services like libraries. You know, being a massive reader, I cannot tell you how often I went down to my local library when I was studying my undergraduate for books, for materials. They're great places for people to pick up materials, for people to meet, as Claire said, as places to go and visit. And it is devastating. It's absolutely catastrophic that we've lost things like the libraries in small places, in local communities where people don't have access to resources that those people do have in big cities and whatnot. So it is absolutely dreadful, and it drives me up the wall that austerity measures have pushed us so far to the point where we're losing essential social services and public services like libraries. Like words fail me, honestly. In regard to Desborough in particular losing its library, you'll have to enlighten me about the specific details of that because I'm not particularly well informed when it comes to this particular library, but I know the vibe of how it's been in Northamptonshire under the Tory County Council and Northamptonshire County Council has just been absolutely dreadful, and we are in the situation we are now because of them and them alone.
I completely agree with Claire and Jamie. I think we absolutely should not have got to this position. And I think, Philip, I take the fact you're not actually telling a lie, but I also think you're being a little economical with truth. Now, I think the Conservatives run Northamptonshire County Council. The Conservatives have misrun Northamptonshire County Council for well over 10 years. Lib Dems were warning about overspend in the budget before even the financial crisis hit. And it's been going on for a very long time. And the idea that things are going to be magically solved when the new unitary comes in, if many of the same people are running the authority, I think is somewhat laughable. And particularly because a number of the county councils also have seats on the borough council. Now it's interesting that the Conservative served MP is very pleased that he's managed to convince a Conservative-run county council not to cut libraries after they proposed them. He said that the commissioners wanted to close them. Commissioners appointed by a Conservative government. And he also said that it was commissioners doing it. Well, the only reason the commissioners proposed it was because the previous Conservative administration proposal to close libraries was overturned in a judicial review. The Conservatives then put on their leaflets that they have saved libraries. The Conservatives are the only people that claim to save something from themselves. It is a rather Kafkaesque situation, and if it wasn't so serious, it'd be quite laughable. Now, on the issue of the town council, obviously I'm not a Desborough resident. It's fundamentally something to people of Desborough. But one of the things I've observed is Desborough was very firmly kicked out made clear their opposition to the previous Conservative town council when they had that huge council tax rise, because they were upset that the council didn't listen, as far as I could tell. Then we're seeing the town council come a proposal which seems to be unpopular, and they don't appear to be listening. I think it's important that whoever is running the town council, that they take an effort to listen to what the people of Desborough want and do that.
Sometimes I feel like I'm on another planet when I listen to some of the comments from the right. As far as the issue about the library, the thing I find ironic is that we had a former MP who derided the county council and then said they're the best people to run the libraries. I don't really understand that particular issue, but the libraries are not being transferred into the new unitaries. Only 15 of them are. As far as Desborough is concerned, that is Desborough's decision. All I know is that the county council as a landlord is less desirable than almost any other landlord in that way. And that's a democratic decision, and we should be driving those decisions down to the local level. Rothwell has a different way of going around that. all the leaflets coming out will be praising zero council tax from the Conservative Party. It appears all the time. You can't get something for nothing. It has to be value for money in terms of local government. The county council were following every line of what the Conservative government was saying. Eric Pickles in 2010 said that local government has £2 billion worth of assets in cash and buildings. Sell them, use your reserves. Northamptonshire County Council didn't have that level of reserves. The former MP praised Jim Harker in 2013 for once again setting zero council tax, and then within a few years was deriding the county council because it couldn't put its taxation up to meet what was clearly known that social care, children's and adults, was going to eat away for every budget. The reason the potholes aren't being covered are because it's gone into social care. And we had a former MP who year on year on year, like the lady says, voted to cut the grant. Now, this is a grant from us. It's our taxes coming back to this county, and at the same time, we were piling on new housing. We were bringing people from London, often who had a greater need for social care than was originally in our particular county. So let's understand all of that. So you've got a problem with your county council. The first thing the former MP does is stand up in Parliament and says it's the worst run county council in the country. And the other part of the county council is saying, come to Northamptonshire and be a social worker or a planner or an enforcement officer. I think the economical with the truth is appalling. And with friends like that in the same party, who needs enemies? And I think that is disgusting. And the answer to your question is that we want our taxes coming back here to properly fund, with the people who understand it, the local services that we have. And as your MP, I would be fighting for local government funding, not fighting to cut it.
Okay, thank you once again, panel. We now have a completely different subject from young Sue.
Good evening. Good evening. Since I formulated this question, actually, there's been quite a lot about it on the news and in the newspapers, so I do actually know some of the opinions of the main parties on this, but I'd be interested to know my prospective MP's opinion on it. There's a large cohort of about 3.7 million women in this country whose pensions were effectively stolen from them. They were brought up for the whole of their life expecting to get their pension at 60, and it was decided that the pensions would be changed to 66. Many of these women didn't get sufficient notice for it. They weren't able to make suitable arrangements to cover their cost of living, basically, for those 6 years. And a lot of them are having serious financial hardship. It's been on the news a lot, and I actually nearly threw my radio out the kitchen window yesterday to listen to Mr. Gove and his throwaway comments about how this generation of women seem to be doing quite well for themselves, actually. Don't really need the money, it'd be better spent on the unemployed or the youth. That's fine, I agree, all of those people need money, but these women have actually paid for their pensions. They weren't given notice of how it was going to change, and they are suffering serious hardship. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And it is their money. It was their money. They've paid for it. They've worked for 45 years, a lot of them. So I'm very interested to know how my prospective candidates personally feel about this, because as I say, I know how the Labour Party feels about it, and I certainly know how Michael Gove feels about it. So I'd like to know how you people feel about it, please, and what you would do if you were in power, whether you would take us seriously. Thank you.
There's been one or two comments about age this evening, and what I can say is that my wife was clapping too, because she was born in 1953. This is typical government dreadfulness, if you like, to make that particular point. To actually have people paying into a national insurance system, and then without notice, as you correctly say, I think it's Sue, isn't it, to take that away. When I was canvassing in fact, no, someone sent me an email who had to be made redundant at age 59, has to wait until 66 to be able to get the pension that she had paid into consistently all the way through her life. So the answer to your question is that I would 100% support you. If I don't, I'll have problems at home as well. But taking that less with that humour within it, it is a massive amount of money. What really, really worries me is that there will be people who have passed away who didn't have that opportunity to be able to claim that pension. So it's like a lot of government policies. There's another policy which says that the government was going to give us £2.5 billion for local government. And when you looked in the detail, it said we're going to give the local council the opportunity to rise 2% more and take that from you. So it is an appalling situation, and you have my 100% support in what you're saying. I do appreciate it's a massive amount of money and it will take some time and energy. But with the WASPI group, I'm sure that as your MP, we can talk to you, understand how that can be brought back and not leaving you in that situation. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this question to us. I think there are many thousands of women in this situation up across the country. Yes, indeed. My understanding of the situation is a number of things happened. That the initial basic idea underlying this was underlying why the change was made was to try to get men and women to retire at the same age. That idea is in itself not unreasonable. The problem is the insufficient notice, and I agree that wasn't good, right. My understanding is the original decision was made in the 1990s, but that in 2011 the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition made an alteration to that, and that also didn't have as much notice as was needed by that. And I'm sorry that happened. I am. It is. I think that if we are to have changes to pensions, I think we do need to do so. That needs to be in plenty of time so people can plan for their personal situations. I don't think that happened. I think we do need to have some form of compensation system in place. I'm not familiar with the precise details of exactly how that's going to be funded. I think Labour are either, to be fair. But I think it is important that we look at how we do it. I think pensions are the problem generally. Pensions were set up with people paying in national insurance, expecting that to go into a fund to pay for their pension, when it simply wasn't. Pensions being paid pensions for the day's pensions being paid for by today's workers. And as the country gets older, that's not a sustainable model. And there's many young people today wondering if we're going to get any state pension at all, given how demographics are changing. I think we do need, however, when we do try to make changes to make that work, we have to be fair, and we won't on this occasion. I think that's why we do need to do something to sort that out.
Women against state pension inequality, that's right, isn't it? WASPI. Okay, good. Right. So, I'm not going to lie, I don't know that much about the intricacies of the whole situation. I wish I did. But unfortunately, Chris has told you straight up that the coalition government, the guys to my left and right, were responsible for this in the first place because the tranche of changes they brought in resulted in this massive inequality. But one thing the Greens want to propose is something called universal basic income. And this is basically where every citizen gets a figure of, I think it's £178, which is just a flat rate that's paid to everyone, essentially. And we want to roll this out by 2025. And whilst we kind of try and think of some long-term means of righting this inequality, the first range of people that we want to bring this universal basic income out to is WASPI women, essentially, because the most injustice has been caused to your group, to your demographic. So that's our means of kind of compensating really in the short term for the huge loss of income that's going to arise as a result of this huge pension inequality you've got to deal with. So unfortunately I can't spend much more time talking about it because I'd just be waffling, but that's essentially it in a nutshell. So thank you.
You asked how I personally feel about it. I think this whole thing has been really badly mishandled. I think it's a disgrace. As the MP, I've taken up each individual case that's come to me from women in the affected group. I've contacted the pensions minister individually on their behalf, and got them detailed replies, and I've supported all the WASPI motions in Parliament. To be really honest with you, I cannot stand up here and say that I would vote to pay £58 billion to put this right. I'm afraid the country simply doesn't have that money. Now, Clare, in a moment, will make the commitment to do exactly that, and fair enough on her. But I don't believe that that is costed, and I think the cost to the country of finding that money would be crippling financially. So it's a straight answer to a straight question. Personally, I think the whole thing has been a disgrace. As the MP, I couldn't, however, vote to pay £58 billion to put the problem right.
I'd be interested to see now whether it actually comes from that. I'd like to see that fact checked, because £58 billion seems an awful lot of money for 3.7 million women.
Brexit has cost us so far.
Okay. We've avoided Brexit up to now. We've done really well. Okay, over to Claire.
I think everybody in this room knows what I'm going to say 100%. You know, you're right, I'd like to see that figure too. I'd like to see the maths around that and the calculation, because I'm not quite sure that's the exact figure of it. When it comes to WASPI, and let's be clear, WASPI is just one group. It is a group. There are lots of other, you know, campaign groups that are fighting for these women, or as we call them, the 50s, the women born in the 50s.
Asking for the retirement age to be reversed.
No.
They're asking for compensation for the people that are particularly affected
Yeah.
by it.
Yeah, and it is the compensation, and it's so women being given a year, less than a year's notice, that their retirement has just been increased by 6 years. Now, many of those women will have children of their own who then have grandchildren, and they've made arrangements so mum can go back to work, you will have the children, and it's the impact. And I think the fact that we've got this far, and these, you know, the women have had to fight so hard, pays testament to how we still, in the decision-making process in this country, do not understand the issues that affect women. So, I mean, I was with WASPI just last year, actually, so 100% yes, campaign with them. I don't really need to say more than that, because I'm quite passionate about this. I really am quite passionate about this. When it comes to Westminster, will I be voting to support those women and get them the compensation that they require? You're damn right I will. Yeah, their pension, yeah. Forgive me.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got 3 very quick questions. Leah, what's the question if it works? Thank you.
I'd like to know the candidate's opinion on fox hunting, and also whether they believe the legislation in regards to the conservation of species and habitats should be strengthened and maintained, even if we leave the EU, which does provide us with much of the legislation.
I'm going to be really honest and say I do not know that legislation inside out, back to front. My opinion on fox hunting, I don't think it will be any surprise to this room that I am totally against fox hunting. 100%. In no universe, on no planet, in no plane would I ever support fox hunting. I'm also against the killing of any animals for the purpose of sport or fun. A living creature is a living creature with a life force, and, you know, has an absolute place here, and I don't want to get all kind of environmental, you know, friends of the earth, but what gives... Yeah, that's your job, Jamie, sorry. I'll save some for later. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I personally do not understand what gives anybody the right to take a life for the purpose of their own entertainment. I just don't get it. So I hope that answers your question. I don't know the legislation you're referring to. I'll be really honest about that. But I'm happy to take a look at it and get back to you.
a Conservative manifesto commitment not to change the Hunting Act, so that's not going to change. With regards to habitats, well, Jamie's obviously the leading expert on the panel on that, but the Conservatives will introduce an environment bill that will increase environmental standards, habitat directives, etc. So there'll be no weakening of the protection for the countryside.
I don't feel like I need to say anything. So yes, naturally, 100% opposed to the Fox Hunting Act. Any form of hunting is incredibly cruel and barbarous. In regards to environmental protections, obviously I have a pretty deep understanding of the ecological implications of devolving environmental protection that will come about as a consequence of us leaving the EU. So we need some massive environmental standards to replace the potentially outgoing legislation if we did happen to leave the EU in that disastrous scenario. Especially in regard to safeguarding of habitats, this is a massive issue. We've got something that I think you might have heard about, HS2, that seems to be cutting through an awful lot of ancient woodland and well-established habitat, potentially to the detriment of many hundreds of species of butterfly, other invertebrates, pollinators and whatnot. We basically need a massive, thorough revision of how we go about protecting habitat, how we go about safeguarding environments. Things like agriculture, the implications from agriculture, the changes that we've had in that kind of culture leads to a lot of hydrological changes in how habitats maintain their kind of soil nutrient levels and whatnot, how pollinators and pesticides interact because they're not compatible remotely, so we need an awful lot of safeguarding on that side of things. So there's absolutely a host of policy changes that need to be made, things that we can improve upon if we maintain our relationship with the EU, but standards that we need to generate independent of that because the protections that we have for wildlife right now are completely insufficient. Thank you.
On the issue of fox hunting, I've always been opposed to fox hunting. I don't think it is the kind of thing that we should be doing. I have like Clare, I have ethical objections to any animals being killed for sport or fun. So I think I agree completely with that. I think the bill itself, the act itself, I think the workings of it are not always as effective in practice. It's sometimes written in a very clumsy way, and I think perhaps there are some ways we can improve that to make it stronger. In terms of maintaining environmental protection, you're right. There's a lot of environmental protection law that comes from the European Union. Now, obviously, our position is to stay in the European Union. So if we did, we would keep that. But if Brexit did happen, the European Union Withdrawal Act does allow that to continue, but there is a large amount of potential for those to be written to be taken away at the stroke of ministerial pen, and that worries me. We've seen already how reliable Boris Johnson's promises are on some issues. If he writes on the side of a bus, I'm really worried. I do agree we need to have a specific act of Parliament to ensure that these protections are protected, that any trade deals that we have don't weaken that, and that we can maintain our ethical commitment to animal rights. I also think, it's not in the manifesto, but I think it's just something I think we need to do. There is a draft convention, international convention for the protection of animal welfare that hasn't made it through the United Nations. That needs to happen. And I think any British government should be leading the way in pushing for proper animal rights protection globally so that we don't have to worry about trade deals, that everyone's meeting the same standards anyway. So yeah, I agree with your question. Thank you.
Excuse me, the question almost inferred that fox hunting would be coming back. I see absolutely no reason to reintroduce the original situation. So I'm not sure if that was the intention of the question, but I think the current legislation does work. If it needs improving, then that can be improved by the same way as any other law might be improved. The will of the people ended up with the current laws we have about fox hunting, and therefore I see no reason to change that. I also see many reasons that if parliamentary time is available for such a thing, that there are many other things that we should be concentrating in parliamentary time. In terms of environmental protection, I'm going to look to my right and say I think I'm the only person that was born and brought up on a farm. On the panel here,
One of my best friends was on a farm. Does that count?
Claire's best friend was on a farm too, so that will count. But to those of you who know me, I was born and brought up in Braybrook. We're the 5th generation to be looking after that particular farm. Animal husbandry and the environment is part of my DNA, the seasons and the way in which our countryside works. So I think one of the assets that I would have particularly is within the farming industry to have some knowledge of what the farming industry is about. I've campaigned against the neonicotinoids, which are the chemicals which were killing the bees. On the Borough Council, I brought forward a task and finish group for a pollinator strategy, which you can find on the website. And in my year, again, when we sat in this room in my mayor making, my campaign that year was bringing the bee back to the borough. And we focused there on wildflowers on verges, the whole environmental process. And there's a great deal that councils can do. I, on the County Council, seconded the motion for the climate emergency with colleague Chris Stanborough, who is a Liberal Democrat, and on the Borough Council, our Labour colleagues, and a particular Labour colleague there, Anne, seconded, and I moved the motion, which was unanimous. So climate change is crucial as far as I'm concerned. I drive an electric car, we built an eco house, and as I was saying to Clare earlier, we both make eco bricks. So as far as environmental protection, absolutely number one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again, Jim. Right, we've got time. I'm going to have just 2 more questions. One from this gentleman here, and if it can be short, if you can keep your answers short, that'd be fantastic. Okay, and I've got one, which is probably a one-word answer, probably afterwards. Okay.
Okay, so apologies for the intervention earlier. It was not what the protocol was, but I honestly think that the room changed slightly. I think it was better for having an open discussion. It was previously like question time behind a glass screen, so thank you for allowing that to go on. And live wasn't my question earlier. That's just a passion because my mum was a primary teacher. She's retired and she's volunteering several times a week at Rockwell Library to keep it going because it's a vital part of the community. So whether I said you lied, you were certainly you're loose with some of the facts, let's just say that. So my actual question, and I didn't know the format of this debate, I thought it was individual questions, but my question is to you, Mr. Hollobone. There's a really interesting website that if no one is aware of, you can check how your MP votes. And our former MP here, over the last 3 years, just the last 3 years, has 16 times voted that legal EU nationals in this country who live here with their families, are employed and pay taxes, should not remain after Brexit. So my question is, I'd like you to go first, please, Mr. Hollobone, and then the rest of you can follow with your answers. But personally, and please do not patronise me with a Boris Johnson soundbite, Cummings soundbite, your personal view on why people who live in this country and came here legally should be deported. And with no irony for your jacket, thank you.
Well, the straight answer to that question is that when the Brexit negotiations started, Theresa May made an offer. One of the first things she did to the EU, that we take out the issue of EU nationals in this country and UK nationals in EU countries from the negotiations, so that we deal with that on day one. The EU refused to do that. So the motions that you refer to were part of strengthening the UK's negotiation to try and get that issue dealt with up front. So I don't want any EU national to be deported. I want all the EU nationals who are here to stay here. They're a strong and vibrant part of our local community, and we're lucky to have them. But the EU refused to apply the same rules to UK nationals in the EU.
But forever now, your vote is shown on the internet. To that fact, because you're talking to 90 people, but everybody else just sees you as a bigot who wants to leave the country.
Well, the problem with a lot of these things on the internet, a lot of these websites, is they sum up things in a really concise way which doesn't explain the reason behind those votes, for example. It's like having a debate with just headlines, without some kind of argument behind it. Now, I'm not responsible for what websites publish about me, but whenever I'm asked about my voting record, I'm happy to do my best to explain it.
Okay, right. Okay, good. I think we could be here for some time on this one. Do any of the other members of the panel want to comment at all on that particular point? You don't have to.
You don't need to, really. If you want to.
Just to say, just in short, I'm all about inclusivity and acceptance of every gender, every identity, every background, every nationality, every sexuality, every sense of the word you could possibly think of. It boggles my mind that someone couldn't see someone as an equal just because they come from somewhere outside the European Union, or see as they're somehow lesser than them and need deporting or treating differently because of the colour of their skin or the language they speak or their sexual identity. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Chris?
I think I might pass the mic back to Philip after my answer, I think, for that one. Firstly, I think it's a matter of principle, and it's a matter of values. Had the UK made an explicit stance that we will, as a matter of principle, not be kicking out people that have been part of our community for 20, 30 years, the EU would have returned suit. I think if they hadn't, it would be shameful, and the shame would be on them. But no matter what they do, it is for us to decide what happens in our country. That's what the Brexit referendum was about, wasn't it? Taking back control. We decide what happens in our country. And I know multiple people in Desborough, in Kettering, and elsewhere who are affected by this, who are deeply, deeply worried, some of whom no longer feel welcome in this country, and that would have been a very clear way to make them feel welcome, and it's shameful that we didn't do it. On the point that I didn't catch your name. D. On the point that D made about equality and human rights, I think it's well known that Philip's voting record on equal rights, particularly LGBT rights, has been not the best over the years, shall we say. I think, and for voting against equal marriage, voting against LGBT inclusive education lately, which was interesting, relating to relationships and education, and other things involving adoption and various other laws over the years. Do look it up. It is concerning. It's not the values I have. As a bisexual man myself, I'm a little disappointed that I'm not viewed as being worthy of some of these rights, and I think it's important that the MP for this area is willing to stand up for the rights of every member of it.
I don't need to wear a Union Jack to love my country. I do love my country. I also, with a daughter-in-law who's Brazilian, respect her love for her flag, and anyone else who has a love for their particular country and their flag, wherever they may be living. I don't see that one individual or one race or nation has a monopoly over loving where they came from, where their roots were from. I will declare that we came over as the last time that England was invaded in the Norman Conquest with William the Conqueror. So, we are perhaps going back there in French. I dislike immensely the inference over the last number of years of going to the point where some people are welcome in this country and some people are not. If you've lived in this constituency all your life, you've gone to school and grown up with Italians who came over and fought with us during the Second World War, with Polish people and with all other nationalities. And I love that diversity from wherever people come from. And the inference that some people are less worthy to be here or not, I dislike immensely. I love that sort of diversity. To then come and say, well, we'll pick and choose the people we want from abroad because they're going to do certain jobs or certain aspects, I equally very much dislike. If you go to Kettering General Hospital, and all of us from time to time have had to be there for one reason or another, the diversity of people who are working there, who are keeping us alive, who are keeping us safe and are looking after us, it sickens me when that inference comes along to say, we don't want you, we do want somebody else. We would not have the safe place in our borough to live in without the diversity of people who have come here and chosen to work and learn here and to move away. And I just find that aspect of the last 3 years something you would never see if I become your MP.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to...
I feel the need.
Okay, go on, Claire. All right, Chris.
And I will make it very quick. And coming on your point, I think we know where the Labour Party stands on this, and I fully support that. Any EU national that is here and that is settled will remain in this country. I worked for over a decade in local government as an equality and diversity officer. It was my job to make sure that our policies and our services were all delivered equally and fairly. It is a personal passion of mine, and you've probably picked up this evening, for me, it's about celebrating people's differences and their strengths, and they have a place in our community and their hearts.
It's a very big passion of mine.
Yeah, and from the place I come from, everybody has the right to thrive and be the best version of themselves. Everybody should have that right. Social barriers, cultural barriers should not be stopping the likes of you and me from aspiring to be the best we can. We have to be the best version of ourselves. And I don't think anybody outside of ourselves should stop us from doing that. And that's very much the place I come from. With regards to the point on the voting history, and I do want to pick up on this, and it's not meant as a dig, but the website you refer to is actually a very informative website, and it does go into quite detail about what's been voted on, and it breaks down what those votes are. And if you want more detail around what that vote was about, you can then look at Hansard, and that will tell you what that vote was about. So this isn't a mispublication. This is how a person has voted. And it doesn't matter whether it was to strengthen bargaining. For me, that makes it even worse, because you have used these people as a bargaining chip. And that is wrong.
Okay, one more.
The website's called They Work For You. Okay? And that's what we need to know.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for that. Right, just to one more very good question from myself, and I appreciate a yes or no answer on this one from all the panel. This is from me. Before you have a couple of minutes just to make your case in front of 95 people, actually 96 I counted. Anyway, we get the
it's more terrifying now, 96.
I remember going to a football match which had 99 spectators there, and when the AA man turned up to fix the car, they included him to make it 100. Anyway, my question, very straightforward, basically yes or no. Should party manifestos be legally binding? Claire, go first.
I'm going to say yes. Yes. I think, one answer, yeah. I think if we make a commitment to the people, I will stand here and make a pledge to you. That is my promise to you. If I do not deliver, you absolutely haul me over the coals in 5 years' time or before then.
Well, my answer is no, and the reason it's no is because if you made them legally binding, you would squeeze the life out of independent-minded members of parliament within their own parties. And if you go to theyworkforyou.com website, you'll see that as a Conservative MP, I voted against my government more times than any other Conservative MP in history. And it's important that an MP is independent-minded and not a slave to the party political machine.
Unless it's about Brexit, of course.
Okay, Jamie?
I think messages plastered on the side of buses should be legally binding.
Can we write the world more about something? We should stick to it.
The problem with a question like that is because it glosses over everything, and there are minutiae to things. I think if you're making big grand promises that are budgeted, then I think you should stick to those, because if you don't hold people to their promises, to what they advertise as truths and realistic prospects, then it just undermines the whole somebody's word being their bond. I think it just completely devalues any sense of truth or belief that you can have in politicians if everything they're allowed to write, they're allowed to renege on. So there should be a certain amount of legally binding or obligation that comes from writing things in manifestos. Otherwise, it's just mistruths, and we've had enough of those over the last couple of years to last us a lifetime. So, yes, in some way.
Okay. The question is, should it be legally binding? Now, while I very much think politicians should do what the manifestos say on the whole, I think, should it be legally binding? No, that's not the role of judges. It's not the role of judges to be enforcing political documents. That's the role of voters, and voters should, if parties don't meet their manifestos, respond very firmly at next election, as the Liberal Democrats know very, very, very well to our cost. Unfortunately, so I think should be legally binding. No, should politicians do it? Absolutely.
I'll say yes, and I'll choose the best bits as the MP.
Okay, let's go. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to call it a wrap. The way to do this, we'll start with Jim, as the microphone's at his end of the table. So we've got 2 minutes just to say what you want to say and summarise where you are exactly, Jim. Thank you.
Can a local person be an MP? And I never thought I'd stand up in a room and look at Phil Salford, who we have ideologically different viewpoints. Phil, born in a local village, I was. Phil went to Kettering Grammar School, I did. Phil was leader of the Borough Council, I was. Phil became an MP. So, I never thought I would embarrass you by saying that, but yes, a local person can be an MP. You don't have to come in from afar to do that. I am genuinely local. 5 generations of my family have lived here, and several generations have served the communities in which we live. I want the same things for your family and your business as I want for mine. My view is that your MP should be hands-on. My leaflet unashamedly talks about campaigning that I've done. If there's an issue coming up, your MP should be there with you, standing side by side. I can't understand how anyone can not have a social media presence in 2019 to be able to engage and participate with what the community actually wants. And I will continue to use that social media presence in order to understand, to feed back, and to participate with the people who would elect me in that way. If you elect me as your MP, I will establish an office. I will have a letterbox. I will have a building, which may be dangerous, with my name above it, so that you can come and you can talk to me, wherever that is. I will also call public meetings, which I love public meetings. Thank you, Kevin, for this tonight. So that, not in relation to the last question, having a manifesto and sitting rigidly to it, or signing up to a deal before anything actually is, before the new Parliament comes into being. So, what you see is what you get. You don't get pacts with other people. Your vote is for me. My vote will take your views of the local people's view first and politics second. Fortunately, with anyone else, like the last election, you might have voted one way and got the DUP. Parties are standing and standing down and standing aside across the country. So, what you see is what you get. Vote Jim.
Before I give my closing remarks, I'd just like to say thank you to Kevin for organising today's debate. It's not a small ask, particularly in a venue like this, and I believe it's the first time we've done something like this, isn't it? Similar, yeah, but parliamentary one. So I very much thank you for doing that. Without you doing this, we wouldn't be here. So very much appreciated. Now, this evening we have heard a number of views from a number of different people, and we haven't touched on Brexit much. I'm pretty sure, I can probably safely say that, not many people have come in here and changed their view on Brexit. I imagine that hasn't changed. The main thing that Devon's standing for in this election is to give those of you who want Britain to remain the chance to vote for a party that unexplicitly wants that to happen. We were the second largest party in the European elections in Kettering last time, so we think we are the best choice for that. But that's not all we've talked about today. We've talked about schools. I'm a teacher. I passionately believe schools need more funding. I believe that they need to be better run, and we need to let teachers teach. We haven't talked about health, but if we did, I'd have talked about the fact that we need to invest in our health service. We need to invest, we're proposing investing £35 billion extra in the health service over the next 5 years, but we are willing to say that you have to pay more income tax to make that happen. You've got to, if you want something, you've got to pay for it. I'm committed to equal rights. I'm committed to ensuring that everybody, no matter who they are, no matter what their background, has the same start and the same opportunities in life, and that is something that's been at the core of my life, really. And I believe that we need to ensure that we have proper representation. Like Jim, I would open an office and make sure, I've talked about this earlier, but I'll make sure that I'll be available. As a local, I was born and bred in Kettering, even though I live in Wildman in a minute. My family can trace their roots back to Northamptonshire, at least part of my family. The Irish side doesn't quite count, but part of my family traced back about 500 years, and I am committed to this area, to Northamptonshire, and I'll be happy to represent it. So I would be proud to be your MP, and I hope you will consider it.
Unlike the parties around me, the environment is core to our agenda, and it has been since 1985. Some of these parties around me might throw climate-focused objectives into their manifestos, but our party fundamentally is concentrating on stopping climate change and stopping global warming. And we make no bones about that. We don't try and misrepresent ourselves to say that we're all things to all people, because the environment is the core to our agenda. And there have been climate emergencies declared across the country, and this is a colossal issue, and it needs radical action now. There's no point in us milling about and waiting a couple of years for someone else to take care of it after we've dealt with Brexit. But that's the thing, the climate is number one to our agenda right now. Brexit is secondary to it. This is a climate election for us. We need radical action, and we need radical change to stop climate change. We need huge things from the ground up. We need a devolved parliament to put more power into county councils to make change happen at a local level. We need changes to infrastructure to improve green transport options, improve cycling networks, improve pedestrian safety and pedestrian availability. We need to decarbonise our economy. I mean, we're looking the Greens. It may sound like a large figure, but it is costed out, and I can show you on the manifesto that we have £100 billion earmarked every year for the next 10 years to decarbonise our economy, to overhaul our means of gaining energy, just removing fossil fuels entirely from our ecosystem, our business ecosystem, and improving wildlife. And these things are so imperative, they're so important, but they need to happen now. It's no point in us turning around in a couple of years' time when we see we've had 16 of the 17 hottest years already in this century alone. We can't ignore the fact that there's significant things that are going to affect subsequent generations. Long after we're gone, things are going to be irreversibly changed if we don't make a difference right now. But that does necessitate radical, significant action, not a bunch of meandering and cyclical indecision that's happened in Parliament over the last 6 months, obsessed with this one particular issue, when there's something far more pertinent and far more important that needs tackling now, and it needs tackling locally, nationally, and worldwide. Thank you.
A very big thank you to Kevin for organising this evening, to the Ritz for hosting us, and to you, ladies and gentlemen, for giving up your Tuesday evening and for the questions which you've posed. The best bit about being the local MP since 2005 isn't the high politics and the debate and the drama. It's helping the individual constituents who come to me for help each and every day of the week. Typically, in a year, about 5,000 local people come to their MP for assistance. About 100 people a week, and it's a delight to be able to do my best to answer their inquiries. But when it comes to the politics, the reality is that Desborough voted for Brexit. I'm the only candidate on this top table who will get Brexit done. A vote for any of the others will mean either we have a more debate about whether we leave, or we won't leave, or there'll be another referendum, and the agony will go on. Vote for me, we leave on the 31st of January, and Brexit is done. And then we can concentrate on the priorities that local people have. The NHS, I've secured £46 million for a new urgent care hub at Kettering General Hospital. I want to see 300 more police officers on Northamptonshire streets, including in Desborough, and I want more funding for our local schools, including Lowlands, Havelock and Monarchy, which will get with the Conservative government. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending.
I was actually having such a lovely, refreshing evening thinking, wow, we're discussing everything but Brexit. And I'm not going to start discussing Brexit because, you know, for me, this election, whilst Brexit is very important, I don't think you can say actually 61% of Desborough voted because actually you can't break the figure down to Desborough alone. For me, this election is about you. It's about you making this choice at this vital time and asking yourself that question: are you happy? Are you happy with what's going on in your society? Are you happy with what your children have got to look forward to? Are you happy with what is being provided? Because if you are not happy, it's time for change. And I'm not going to quote the Labour Party manifesto to you. I'm not going to tell you all the things that are really there, because quite frankly there's a lot. Hell of a lot. But if you buy a house that has been run down and you want to make the best of that house, do you put up a set of curtains and give it a lick of paint? Or do you rebuild it from the foundations? Because that change has to happen. Our society has become so declined, in particular here in the constituency of Kettering, that we have to start and build again. We need to start creating positive futures, which comes back to the points about youth services, education, the environment, history, getting our children excited about where we come from and where we're going. So this is the biggest job interview in our country. And you are the interview panel. And here are your candidates for the job. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say to you, I've got a vision, and I know that I want to create a positive future in the constituency of Kettering. And I really hope you choose me to do that job.
Okay, thank you everybody. But on a personal level, I'd like to thank each and every one of the candidates who've been absolutely wonderful to liaise with, to get everybody here, and it was fantastic. Thank you to all of you for coming out on a Tuesday evening. I don't know if it's still raining out there or whatever. I believe if you want to attend any more of these, I believe there's another one on Friday in Kettering, is there? Is that right? On the 6th of December in the big church in Kettering, is it?
And
Montsize holding one. And I believe there's a BBC Radio Northampton next Monday on the 2nd of December. So there are more opportunities if you can get along and to ask those questions which you might have a burning desire to even after this evening. So thank you once again. For anybody who's in the vicinity on Friday, please remember it's Desborough Gala night. You don't want to be missing that, okay? So if you all want to come back on Friday evening and wander along Station Road, please do so. You're more than welcome. Thank you to all our candidates once again. I do believe that some photographs might want to be taken.